Thank everybody for their patience today. It's been a long day. Today we had a Detroit man who was sentenced to 20 years in prison for a key role in his methamphetamine trafficking ring. This trafficking ring actually went as far as Los Angeles to bring methamphetamine back to Detroit, which eventually ended up in southern West Virginia. The defendants in this, they called themselves the Boyz. I have several people here with me today. I'd like to identify them before we get into the meat of the press conference. From the DEA, I have the ASAC, J.T. Scroggs. From the ATF, I have our new ASAC, Rob Maynard. From the Marshal Service, we have the United States Marshal Michael Bayless and the Deputy U.S. Marshal Anthony Santorio. From the Charleston Police Department, we have Jason Webb, who's the commander of MDENT. We have Corporal A.D. Aldridge, also of Charleston Police Department. And from the West Virginia State Police, we have Corporal Kevin Williams. Today, Myro Dixon, 33, of Detroit, was sentenced to 20 years in prison, followed by 8 years of supervised release for his role in this drug trafficking organization known as the Boyz, who also had ties to the Bloods and Gangster Disciples criminal gangs. This takedown impacted the west side of Charleston. The group of individuals was the largest drug trafficking organization operating in that area, and they were very dangerous. During the course of the nearly year-long investigation, law enforcement seized approximately 15 pounds of methamphetamine, 45 firearms, including a fully automatic Uzi 9mm submachine guns, and more than $375,000 in cash. Members of this drug trafficking organization were involved in or suspected in numerous shootings around Charleston and particularly the west side. This organization ran from July 2020 till February 2021. Mr. Dixon used a co-defendant to transport pre-packaged quantities of methamphetamine from Detroit to Charleston on at least 5 separate occasions. He pled guilty to conspiracy to distribute more than 50 grams of methamphetamine. As I said, the judge found relevant conduct of more than 50 pounds of methamphetamine. McNeely and 10 other individuals who was the co-defendant pled guilty in connection with this prosecution, the result of which was dubbed the Boyz. During the course of this nearly year-long investigation, as I said, there was lots of firearms seized. I'm paying particular attention to the Uzi. I mean, we have a submachine gun on the streets of Charleston, which I think is terrifying. And I think the gentleman behind me and law enforcement associated with this did a great job in taking these people off the street. I want to mention with respect to the Uzi submachine gun, the federal law requires that fully automatic firearms not in possession or under control of the U.S. government be registered by the National Firearms Registration and Transfer Record. One of the co-defendants in this case, Memphis Ross, admitted he brought the Uzi submachine gun to his mother's Charleston residence, where it was found by law enforcement officers on July 26, 2020. He ultimately pled guilty possession of a fully automatic machine gun that was not registered with him. With respect to today's sentencing, all the defendants charged in the original indictment have now been convicted and sentenced with the exception of 2, and that's one of the reasons we're having a press conference today is I'm going to ask for the public's help in trying to apprehend these 2 individuals. They are Tyjaha Watson, 27, of Charleston, and Elijah Figg, 23, of Huntington. If you have any information as to their whereabouts, I would ask you to contact the United States Marshal Service. This investigation removed a large amount of drugs and perhaps more importantly firearms from the streets of Charleston West Side. It eliminated them as a source of harm and violence from this community. I want to commend the Drug Enforcement Administration, the ATF, Charleston Police Department, the MDENT. I would also like to thank the U.S. Marshal Service, the West Virginia State Police, and Appalachian HIDA for providing assistance in this case. I would also like to commend Assistant United States Attorney Monica Coleman for her successful prosecution in this case. I'm going to mention some of the other defendants who I think are relevant, and then I'm going to turn it over to some other speakers. There is a gentleman named Elijah Watson, also known as Leak, of Charleston, 29 years old. He was sentenced to 20 years and 1 month for distribution of methamphetamine. Dante Williams, Dance of Charleston, was sentenced to 10 years for distribution of methamphetamine. Jermaine Williams, also known as Manio Duckiu, 22, of Charleston, was sentenced to 7 years and 3 months. Darius Coles, also known as D-Boy, was sentenced to 6 years and 6 months. Erica Ratliff, 38, of Charleston, was sentenced to 6 years possession with the intent to distribute. Joshua Lawson was sentenced to 5 years possession with the intent to distribute methamphetamine. Jaquan Jeremiah Wright of New York was sentenced to 5 years for being a person subject to domestic violence protective order and possession of a firearm. As I stated, Memphis Ross was convicted of the possession of the fully automatic machine gun. He was sentenced to 3 years and 10 months. Devontae Levon Andrews, 30, of Charleston, was sentenced to 3 years and 1 month for being a felon in possession of a firearm. William Edward Byers, 46, of Charleston, was sentenced to 3 years for being a felon in possession of a firearm. Cassie McNeely, 23, of Lesage, was sentenced to 2 years for use of a telephone to facilitate a drug trafficking. Judge Copenhaver was actually the one that imposed today's sentences. I have two speakers who wish to address you as well. The first is Assistant Special Agent in Charge J.T. Scroggs of the DEA.
Good evening. I'm especially proud of the work done by the men and women of the Drug Enforcement Administration and our law enforcement partners with this investigation. At the time when West Virginia leads the nation in drug poisonings per capita, those who trade in illegal drugs are on notice. If you're slinging your poison and sow misery in our communities, we'll be relentless in our efforts to find you and bring you to justice. The U.S. Attorney has already listed several of these departments, but I'd be remiss if I didn't, again, mention everybody that helped us on this case and worked together. This takes a community effort and a cooperative effort with law enforcement. So the DEA would like to thank the Charleston MDENT Unit, Kanawha County Sheriff's Office, Charleston Police Department, the South Charleston Police Department, West Virginia State Police, Putnam County Sheriff's Office, St. Albans Police Department, Cobble County Sheriff's Office, Boyd County, Kentucky Sheriff's Office, Russell, Kentucky Police Department, Raceland, Kentucky Police Department, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, and the United States Marshal Service for all the assistance in this investigation. Thank you.
I'd now like to introduce Assistant Special Agent in Charge Rob Maynard of the ATF.
Thank you. Good evening. This investigation led by the DEA was a massive undertaking and a true partnership between local, state, and federal agencies to identify and dismantle a criminal organization operating in our community. Drug trafficking organizations use firearms as a tool to further their trade by exacting violence in areas where they operate. Fear and drug dependency fuel the drug trade by keeping its victims in a never-ending loop of predation and reliance upon those responsible for their plight. Charleston and the surrounding areas have been plagued by illegal drugs and the fear of violence for too long. I hope the message is clear today. ATF, the DEA, and our local and state partners will not let drug dealers hold a community hostage. We are committed to holding these individuals accountable for the violence and drug trafficking they engage in and the destruction they bring to families across the region. The collective sentences imposed on the dozens of defendants will have a lasting impact on the community as we continue to work to keep our community safe from violent crime and free from damages caused by the illicit drug trade. The success of this investigation is a direct result of law enforcement focusing efforts and resources on a singular community issue. Finally, I would like to offer my sincere thanks to the U.S. Attorney's Office for their diligent efforts in prosecuting these individuals and our partners with the DEA and all the law enforcement agencies involved in this important operation. As always, our commitment is to our communities, but we can't do it without the help and support of our communities. Thank you.
In closing, I'd like once again to commend our law enforcement partners. These type of operations is what I want to see this office be known for. I mean, we're taking violent criminals, dangerous firearms, and poison off our street. Does anyone have any questions?
Just your general reaction to today's sentence?
I was satisfied with it. I mean, this was a 20-year sentence. There's a lot of dangerous weapons, dangerous drugs being brought in, but no, I was satisfied with the sentence.
And with regards to, I sat through some of this today, with regards to this defendant and his organization, I know Cassie and I know the other gentleman here from Charleston have already been sentenced before. Does this wrap up his portion of this, or that portion of this? Because I know you said there's a couple people still.
There's still 2 people involved that we're trying to apprehend. But yes, this represents a significant portion of this DTO. We've got the major players. That answered your question.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, is it correct to say you guys have now closed the case on this investigation?
I wouldn't say we closed the case because we still want to prosecute the 2 individuals that are still out there, and hopefully the community will help us find them. And no investigation's ever closed completely. There might be things more develop as we learn into this, but for these individuals, I was pleased with the results on this.
I guess what I was kind of getting at was Mr. Dixon involved with the other, you take away, 11 subtract 3 is 8. Was Mr. Dixon involved with the other 8?
Yes, he was. He was basically the head of the food chain, and everything else worked down through him, if that helps. Okay. Anything?
One thing, obviously, there's a hard case made today for no variance. He ended up getting a decent little variance, perhaps. Your thoughts on that?
That's within the court's sound discretion to do. We do our job, and the courts do their job.
But still yet, 20 years.
I'm satisfied with the 20-year sentence.
And why?
It's taking him off the street for 20 years. It's a deterrent to other people who might be apt to do this type of crime. That 20 years in the federal system means you do almost all of 20 years, and then you got the supervised release following that. I think it was a significant hit. This is not I don't think anybody could ever classify a 20-year sentence as a slap on the wrist or anything of that nature. I think it sends a strong deterrent message that if you're going to deal in these types of drugs, this type of poison, bring in firearms, especially, maybe I'm focusing too much on the submachine gun, but we had a submachine gun on the west side. That's bad, and I think this sends a message that those type of crimes will be prosecuted. We good? Thank you.